Hey everyone, welcome back to Sophomore Citizens. I'm Gigi.
I'm Liesel.
And I'm Lilly.
All right, welcome back to another episode, everyone. Liesel, you have a check-in you'd like to share with us, yes?
Yes, I do. I think that this time of year is a great time to revisit something from a while back, New Year's resolutions. And I didn't make too many New Year's resolutions this year, but one that I did make was I wanted to improve my dancing skills. I am not a naturally gifted dancer, but I've really been wanting to strengthen that muscle, try to dance a little bit better. And like, especially just with like choreography, I just think it would be fun to be better at picking it up. I think dance is a great form of exercise. So recently this week, I did a couple exercise videos at home from a YouTuber named Mad Fit, and she has TikTok dance workouts as well as like 90s dance workout, 2000s dance workout, 2010s, and she has a One Direction dance party. And I had so much fun doing it, and it is like merging two amazing goals of fitness and improving my dance skills.
I have a question, Liesel.
Mm-hmm.
Was improving your dance skills something that you had really set out to do at the beginning of the year? Or it was just like something you mildly wanted to improve over the course of this year?
It wasn't something that I was like, I need to like actually make a game plan and strategize and like really try to do this as like a typical New Year's resolution. But in December, Gigi, or towards the beginning of the year, as you may remember, you introduced me to TikTok, and I was trying to learn the Renegade. I was trying to learn the Say So dance, and like it was genuinely challenging for me. And I was like, this is an area of my life that I could improve in. Like, I think that as far as like dancing at a party or when I'm out, like it's pretty standard, and like I don't feel like embarrassed or shy to like be dancing in public. Like I will totally dance and do my thing, but like when you're dancing in that type of environment, it's not really dance, you're kind of just bopping around. So I
Mhm.
really wanted to like put some time and energy in like, you know, trying to have rhythm, trying to be coordinated, trying to like kind of be able to pick up choreography a little bit. Like this was just something that was in the back of my mind. And I do think that I started to improve a little by little. And like we've also, as a group, done a fitness workout called 305, which is a Miami dance club themed workout. And we did it with a huge group of our coworkers, and it was so much fun. We did that last summer. Back when workout classes were allowed. And like even during that, which is like a dance workout hybrid, like I just really was struggling with the coordination, struggling with some of the moves.
I obviously cannot dance at all, which we've talked about on the podcast, but I love that you bring up New Year's resolutions because that is something that I have never been very good at following through on. And the reason is, which this is nothing new, is because I do enjoy making them. And I think the process of like having some retrospective, introspective work of like, okay, this is what I want to improve on. This is what I liked that I did last year is so great. And then by exactly around this time of year, the summer completely have fallen off, like totally. So I love that you bring this up because this is a little reminder for me and so many of our listeners to maybe look back on the New Year's resolutions that you made or didn't make and reevaluate, because I have completely forgotten what my New Year's resolutions even were at all.
All right, so today's theme for our episode is going to be related to the idea of being young adults generally. As young adults, in many ways, we still feel like children, but we're starting to take on more responsibility, and we're working on phasing out some of those childlike qualities and trying to phase in some more adult-like qualities. So, do either of you girls have any thoughts you'd like to share on this topic generally before we get into the specifics?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this podcast is called Sophomore Citizens, and that sort of came about when Gigi was talking a little bit about the origin of the word sophomore and how it kind of roughly translates to wise baby. And so, obviously, we like to call our listeners and our community the wise babies, because I think that it does really accurately describe this stage of life where there are some attributes about all of us that are much more on the immature side, and there are some attributes about all of us that are more mature and more like grown up and developed. And obviously everyone grows up at a different pace, and everyone's idea of growing up is quite different. I think that some people mark growing up by, how good are you at cleaning and like, just taking care of stuff, paying bills, like all of that sort of stuff. And I think that other people attribute growing up more to like social emotional growth, or impulse control. There's so many different like barometers of growing up. And I think that it's kind of nice to just acknowledge that growing up is such a personal process, and like whatever works for you as far as taking those steps towards maturity is like the best way to do it.
I also think that growing up is something that so often you hear people say, like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared to grow up, or like, I'm really worried about this aspect of growing up. And I know that for me, part of the reason that growing up feels difficult and is scary is because there's parts of me, just like we've said, where I'm like, oh, that feels like a part of growing up that I'm ready to take on. And then there's other parts where I'm like, I cannot imagine a world where I am ever able to do that on my own. Like, I'm going to need my mom for X, Y, and Z for the rest of my life. And having this like internal struggle of like, some parts of me feel grown up, some parts of me feel ready to take that on, and then some parts feel so the opposite, is a big reason why growing up is so daunting in my mind.
Totally. And I also think that there are some like behaviors or things that you're supposed to take on as you age that you're like, this feels so fraudulent. Like, why am I being trusted with this responsibility? Like, I am a child. And it's, I guess, as I was saying, like that phasing in and phasing out of certain qualities that make it such a gradual process. So, today's episode is going to be structured slightly differently, where we will have 3 topics that are related to the ways in which we still feel like kids, and then 3 topics for the ways in which we feel like we have grown up. So, I will start with my first topic for today, which is cooking. I think that cooking is, such a marker of adulthood when you can feed yourself, you can make, advanced dishes beyond just like Kraft mac and cheese. And I feel like, funny enough, the college experience definitely does kind of, again, phase you in and phase you out of those behaviors, because obviously living at home for the most part, either your mom or your dad or whoever is making food for you on a regular basis. And then you go to college and you're completely stripped of that. But most people don't have like a fully functioning kitchen. So you're like, okay, I got to be creative with what I can make given what I've got. And so you pick up a few things here and there, you start to become more comfortable. And then finally, hopefully you move elsewhere where you do have a full on kitchen. And then it's really go time to test your skills. Recently, I was making rice from dry rice. This is not something that I usually do. I, again, personally to this point have chosen, thanks to the help of Trader Joe's, to get frozen rice. Stick it in the microwave, easy peasy, super quick, convenient. That's the kind of chef that I typically am. But I went and got some bulk, like dry rice, because it was what was available and like less expensive or whatever. And I really have very little experience making rice. So I'm doing my best. I'm like, okay, this is low key kind of taking a while, but I'll just be patient with it. I didn't like properly measure the water, but I was like, it'll be fine. And my roommate comes home and is like, "Oh, are you making rice?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Well, you're supposed to put the top on to cook the rice." And I was like, "Well, with pasta, like you're supposed to not put the top on because then it's gonna freaking overflow." And I thought, okay, pasta, rice, like similar enough. Clearly, I was wrong, but I think that in general, it's these learning lessons about cooking that are making me feel like I'm growing up. That was definitely a step in the right direction of learning how to make rice on the stove.
Yeah, and Gigi, to give you the benefit of the doubt, like also we have a rice cooker. So cooking rice on the stove is not something that we're necessarily familiar with. I personally get really stressed out cooking. I get really flustered in the kitchen. I don't enjoy seeing raw meat or handling that in any way, shape, or form. So personally, I'm not a huge fan of cooking. And I think that also, like, with my college experience and my group of friends in New York, takeout culture and kind of like getting frozen stuff and not really cooking super often. So for me, this is something that I would definitely consider myself still a baby in, is cooking. And yeah, I just really don't enjoy cooking personally. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that can relate to me on that.
Liesel, I definitely can relate to you. I feel like cooking is such a good representation of our babynesses, and especially mine, because I think that it represents more than just the act of cooking. But I know that for me, like making bold moves in the kitchen, or just, I don't know, like one of the biggest things that I get flack for when I am cooking in my apartment is that my roommates always make fun of me for measuring the water when I make pasta, which I understand is ridiculous, and I can get that the pasta just needs to be in the boiling water. It doesn't matter how much water is in there. But for me to just like do it on my own feels like such an adult thing that I am not ready to take on. So it's the principle of just like knowing the little, things in the kitchen, like Gigi said, putting the top on for the rice, and for me, measuring the water. That all just symbolizes this like bigger, like making big decisions, and like knowing exactly what to do without calling my mom and asking her how we do it at home. That feels like such an adult thing that I have not adopted at all.
I would also say, as Liesel had sort of mentioned, cooking meat is also very intimidating because there is a right way and a wrong way. And if you do it wrong, you have a big issue on your hands. But I think it's time that we transition into another part of the kitchen, which is Liesel's topic for the ways in which we still feel like kids.
Yes. So, one of the ways that I feel like I'm still a baby is that I do not feel comfortable operating a dishwasher. So I will tell you, growing up, we would not touch our dishwasher. We have a dishwasher and it is never used. For whatever reason, our parents and our housekeeper just have the preference of washing dishes by hand. And so I never really, like growing up, got comfortable using a dishwasher. I even remember one time my mom got me like a job for like a day, maybe in high school, like really early high school, where basically she had this family friend or someone who was throwing a party and they needed someone to just like help out at the party. I like really don't know how I ended up doing this. And she was like, "Okay, so like can you load the dishwasher and like get that going?" And I literally was like, "No, like I don't know how to do that." And so I just had to, wing it. And obviously I figured it out. Like it's not like I can't figure it out. But then even throughout college, a lot of my apartments didn't have dishwashers. When I lived in Italy, we didn't have a dishwasher. And then one apartment that I lived in that I like came in late, they were like, "Oh yeah, we don't use a dishwasher. Like don't even try." So I just have never really been that exposed to using a dishwasher, which I feel like is very baby of me. But I also think that like a lot of people have these appliances or things that they're just like not that comfortable with using. I know that recently when Lily's brother went off to college, he was like, "I need to be taught how to do laundry." And had to have like the little tutorial and whatever. But like to me, it's like with laundry, every laundry machine is different. So you kind of have to just like figure it out?
I can relate to that entirely with the laundry thing. I have screwed up loads of laundry. The first time I ever used a laundry machine by myself, I started the washer without my clothes in it. There's just soap in it. And for anyone who has ever lived in a dorm, you're probably familiar with the fact that they lock, so you can't open it once the cycle has started. So I paid for my load of soap and water to spin around and not wash any of my clothes. So that was great. Um, But operating appliances, whether it be a dishwasher, a laundry machine, I realize that this might sound ridiculous to some more self-sufficient people, but this is a way where I am so dependent, even still to this day. Like, Mom, what do I put the whites on? Is that hot or is that medium or is that cold? Like, keeping track of those little things on top of all the other things I have going on feels like such an adult thing that is so far in the future, because there's so many little things to learn that I just like cannot keep track of.
Totally. And on the topic of like appliances and the foreign nature of appliances, when things break and you're like, what do I do? Like, who do I call? I have no idea. Luckily for me, my roommate is very fix it kind of attitude. She'll happily go to like the hardware store, figure it out, and fix things when they need to be fixed. But unfortunately for me, even though I am lucky to have that roommate in my life, it protects me from having to really learn or take on much responsibility in fixing those appliances. So with that, I think we will transition into Lily's topic for this section of the episode.
Okay, so in some ways related to the kitchen and food, like we've been talking about, but in some ways really unrelated. My topic about being a baby is that I'm severely uncomfortable with the idea of fine dining. Now, what I mean by this is not like a nice restaurant with great food. I love going out to eat. I love my trendy, cool, delicious restaurants. My definition of fine dining is like a five-star restaurant where it's dimly lit. All the waiters and waitresses are dressed in like professional business attire. Maybe a steakhouse would be a good example of this. I feel such anxiety about like ever having to have like a business dinner or a business lunch there. I feel like I don't like the food. I feel like I don't like the environment. I feel like you have to have like stuffy conversations that really don't relate to me, and anything of like getting dressed up to go to that kind of meal makes me so uncomfortable.
So to be honest, I don't know if I fully identify with what you're sharing, Lily, but I feel when it comes to like the forks and the knives and the spoons and the all of that stuff, like the etiquette, I've been taught, I guess, but I also just don't see the value in that. And I feel like that's very fine dining vibes, is like knowing the right fork to use for what. And I don't know, I don't care, and I don't care to know.
And actually, so I don't really relate to this that much, kind of like what Gigi was saying. But Gigi, bringing up the utensils is reminding me of a restaurant that we were recently at where they kept replacing our silverware like multiple times. I think that we ordered a couple different appetizers and we kind of expected all of the appetizers to come at once and then all of the entrees to come at once, the usual kind of flow. But they brought the appetizers one at a time, and then they insisted on replacing our silverware every single time by presenting it to us on like a little tray. And so like we would grab it, and I'm not sure if this was like a COVID thing that like they wanted, to be showing us that like their silverware wasn't touched by their fingers. But it became really awkward because, there's some entrees where you don't use your knife. So my knife is just like sitting there completely clean, and they're like, "Oh, here, let me give you a fresh one." And I'm like, "No, this one is fine." And they're like, "No, no, no, we insist." So they kept giving us new silverware over and over and over. And I personally don't enjoy those sort of interactions with, you know, like people who are like servers or whatever. Like I kind of just want my waiter or waitress or server to just kind of come when they're needed. When they just keep coming back for different things, like I'm just like, get out of my face. Like I'm just trying to have dinner. And the flow of conversation, I'm curious to know from you two, like sometimes I feel like when the waiter comes, like I need to stop having my conversation, and because I feel awkward just like continuing what I was talking about with my friends or family when like the waiter is there like listening. I don't know.
No, Liesel, I can understand that completely. Like, I don't think you need to be like, "Oh, I don't know, like, I feel awkward about that." Like, I agree, it's definitely a confusing thing. For me, I think it just depends on the situation or what the topic of conversation is. Because sometimes if it's something like really serious or vulnerable or intimate, I'm kind of like, "Oh, like I should probably stop talking about this right now." But sometimes I'm also like, "No, I'm just gonna barrel right through." So I guess it just depends. And also it depends on your comfort with the waiter. Because if they're like really hanging around or like being weird, then I'm like, leave me alone. But if they're being chill, then I feel like it's not a biggie.
But that's the thing, like, it's so obvious if you stop talking, you know, and then it's just like silent as they're doing whatever they're supposed to be doing. That sometimes, like, if it is a vulnerable topic that like I wouldn't want the waiter to be hearing or whatever, like I don't know. But Gigi, thank you for validating my feelings. But Lily, to really get back to this fine dining phenomenon, I honestly think that you could live the rest of your life and never experience the scenario that you put forth of a business dinner at a steakhouse where the waiters and waitresses are dressed in business casual. I don't think that you're going to experience that. I don't think it's going to be a problem, and I think that like fine dining in that way that you're talking about, as far as like super fancy steakhouses, is sort of dying out. You know, like I just think that even like the nicest, best restaurants in a big city, like, are getting more and more casual, more and more cool, more and more go with the flow. So I just don't think that this is a phenomenon that you will even have to face.
I can agree with that. I do think that things like even as Liesl is saying, the like top restaurants are a lot more vibey and cool than like a single rose in the middle of the table with a candle. Like I feel like that's being phased out. But what I'm also curious to know from you, Lily, is like if the three of us went to said steakhouse, you'd feel comfortable or uncomfortable?
Well, of course, I always feel comfortable with you too, but like, I don't like anything about it. Makes me feel adult in a weird way. And not that I fine dine that often, like, it's not necessarily from experience. I mean, I've been once or twice, like, the examples I can think of are like with my grandparents, but that environment does not speak to me at all. And I do think that it's very interwoven with like etiquette and like things like putting my elbows on the table that I've like heard I'm not supposed to do, but I don't actually know if I'm supposed to do it. And then when I'm in these environments where I feel the extra pressure to be thinking about that, I am not enjoying my meal because I'm like looking around to see if anyone near me like has their elbows on the table or like what fork they're using or if I'm allowed to drink my water. And so that's why it's so unappealing to me because it just feels like such a pressure situation.
I feel like this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about feeling fraudulent in situations like that. Like you feel like such a fraud being a kid in this fine dining environment. Yeah, I can understand that.
I do not feel old enough to be in that environment at all. And this is one thing where I don't see a world in which I gain the maturity to be like, I am comfortable here. I know exactly where my fork and my knife and my elbows and my everything goes. Bring me into a fine dining establishment. I'm ready to do it.
And I think moral of the story is that we need to send Lily to adult cotillion. That will solve all of these problems for you. And like basically, Gigi and I went to like a crash course cotillion when we were pretty young. It was like a 1 day, full on etiquette lesson, which was pretty interesting to do. But the main things that I learned from that are basically just that like you use your silverware from the out in, I'm pretty sure. So like, if you have multiple forks, you just go from the out in. That's pretty easy to remember. And like also you just leave your fork and your knife on your plate when you're done. Like if you just do that, like that's sufficient.
I think going back to what Liesel was saying about this fine dining experience is probably something you won't ever really encounter. It reminds me of also having to do dance lessons in like elementary school, and they'd make you do like the waltz and the tango with like another 10-year-old. And you're like, what are we doing? I don't want to be touched by anyone. I don't want to come anywhere near these gross ass boys. Like, Lily, we will never have to actually do any kind of ballroom dancing.
No, the fact that we did that is so funny in retrospect, and you really just unlocked a memory because I had completely forgotten that. But I loved those because I was paired with my crush, and I thought it was so fun to have to hold hands and like do the thing. But the fact that we learned that and they were like, oh, this is applicable to the world is absolutely ridiculous.
I feel like maybe they thought they were like making us cultured or something, but I'm like, this is so pointless. Like, why are we doing this?
I kind of love doing it. I thought it was fun. But Lily, one thing that now is popping into my mind that I think that you will probably encounter as opposed to like fine dining at a restaurant, which I just don't think you're going to encounter that often. I had to go to a gala for work, which was kind of like a wedding vibe or like a bar bat mitzvah vibe. Like, I, not really like a bar bat mitzvah where you're a kid, but like in like a big venue space with like
Just
meals.
generalized event, like
Yeah,
just a general event that would take place in an event space.
like formal event. Like that is something that I think that you will actually experience more. I also felt a little bit fraudulent being at a gala. But I think that like this is something that like as you get older, you will just get more and more comfortable with it. And like you'll have legitimate reasons to be at weddings or to be at galas or to be at these various events. And then when you're like the maid of honor, like you don't feel like a fraud, you're like the OG there.
All right, and now we will get into the ways in which we feel like we are, in fact, maturing and aging. Liesel, would you like to give us the first of the three?
Yes. So the way that I feel I have really come into my own as a mature adult person is in becoming so much more of a morning person. I would say growing up and even in high school, like sleep is just so prioritized, and sleeping in on the weekends was such a common thing, sleeping in until like 11 or 12 or later. And I think it also is like biologically determined that like young people are obviously still growing and there's like a lot of brain development and stuff that's happening, that like you need a lot more sleep than you do when you're more of a grown up adult. But I think that like when you're a teenager, like the night, at least for me, was like such a fun time to like, look up videos and like just, I don't know, read random stuff and like watch stuff, and just staying up really late um was like a fun thing to do. Now I much prefer to go to sleep earlier and wake up earlier and have like quiet, nice, peaceful morning time of just like some time for myself. And I just love like waking up, getting my coffee, and just like the world feels so much more like quiet and peaceful to me in the morning. And I also just feel like the morning is a really productive time for me. Like I just feel like my brain is working better. And I obviously know that there's still a lot of adults who are night owls. But for me, like becoming so much more of a morning person has been a way in which I feel like I have really grown up a lot.
I absolutely see being a morning person as the marking of adulthood in so many ways. And it's something that I personally feel like I'm on the brink of. Like, if you were to have asked me a few years ago, even like whether I identified as a night or morning person, not only would I have answered night owl 100%, I would have been like, I don't understand people who wake up before the hour of 8 a.m. That is absurd to me. And now I'm not going to say that I routinely wake up super early, but especially this summer, I really was able to see the benefits of that and maybe like dip my toe in the adult area of like, as you said, Liesel, being productive in the morning and having that time is so valuable. And also just like sleeping better when I'm not going to bed at 4 a.m. and waking up in the afternoon, and like being able to have a whole day is something that I can respect, and just so definitive of like, oh, ooh, she mature, like she knows what she's doing. Like that feels so adult to me.
Totally. And like a few years ago, I would have slept in till 11 and not thought twice about it and been like, okay, let's have a great day. Whereas if I wake up at like 11 or noon now, I'm like, the whole day is shot. I'm like, the whole day is off now because I did that to myself. And it's just funny how much like that morning time, as you're saying, it being a peaceful time, a productive time, like really sets the right tone for the day, and how much better you feel having gone to sleep at a relatively early time and being able to wake up pretty early.
Yeah, and just like spending your time at night doing whatever is happening until like 4 a.m., like Lily is saying, like it just never replenishes you or makes you feel better or sets you up for success, at least in my experience. Like it really has never been a positive or beneficial thing. And I also think that waking up at a relatively consistent time every day is really beneficial, which actually like there is scientific research behind having like a specific sleep time and schedule and doing it routinely can be really beneficial to have better sleep. But I just think having a normal wake up time, having a solid morning routine really just sets you up for success so much more. And I think that it is, like what Lily was saying, just such a marker of being an adult. And I think that it's also really important, like going into the other stages of life and having like a full-time job and having kids and having all of those responsibilities. Like it's so important to be able to wake yourself up, to be mature in that way, and to like have a good schedule and have a good grasp of, time management.
I think that you bring up something really important there, which is that for me, I think part of the reason why this is such an indicator of adulthood is because it marks some sort of schedule and like routine and consistency. That is another thing that I very much see as a growing up thing rather than a thing of the past, of like people that have a regimented day and they have their times for this, like, and other times for that, that feels like an adult thing. And when you have your sleep schedule set to in a way that you're awake for most of the day and not asleep for most of the day, you're able to get things done. You're able to have your time for working out. You have your time for whatever else you do. And that feels very grown up to me.
All right, so now we will get into my topic for the way in which I feel like I am getting older, which is related to clothing. So I feel like, as a teenager, of course, I'm creating some sense of style, some like self expression via my clothing. And obviously, over the years, my style has seen several different iterations. But I think as I'm getting older, the less interest I have in like looking good or wearing something flattering. I feel like I want to feel my age. I want to look somewhat sophisticated, put together, slash like purchase items that I could see myself wearing for the foreseeable future, for the next few years, let's say, rather than buying something like cute and trendy that I'm like, oh yeah, sick, like this will make me fit in with other people. And a little anecdote to go along with this is we were speaking to a friend of our mom's the other day, who has a 16-year-old daughter. And she was just kind of like poking fun at the fact that she'll go to Brandy Melville, let's say, get a crop top, and then come home and still take a pair of scissors to that top to just crop it even more. And I feel like that's totally something that like teen girls fall victim to, or like think that that's a cool look of wearing like sweatpants and a Brandy Melville crop top or whatever. So I think that like trying to phase out some of those tendencies and working on bringing in some more sophisticated pieces to my closet has been a way where I feel like I'm growing up.
I feel like for me, it's a little bit less about, trying to aim for sophistication and just a little bit more about thinking about clothes in a quality over quantity sort of way and kind of gearing more towards a minimalist or like capsule wardrobe kind of mentality. Um, because as Gigi is like, as you're saying, like with trendy pieces, they are really fun to kind of throw in, but it's not gonna be a piece that you will probably like to wear for the long term. So I think that like as I've gotten older, I've focused more on like investing in really good basics and like items that will help me like build many different outfits. And I think that like as you're growing older and as you're spending your own money on your clothes, that is something that you start to think about a lot more of like, you know, trying to find pieces that will really like last a long time and be really beneficial for you. As far as like a sense of style, I personally really dislike there being like an age restriction on clothes or on just like a sense of style in general. Like I just think it's really unfair when people like criticize people for quote unquote like dressing too young. You know, if you're maybe like 40 and you still like wearing jean shorts, like who cares, you know? And I think that people can be really judgmental and critical of that. And something that I've heard a lot is people being like, that woman, her hair is like way too long for her age, which I think is so stupid and I hate so much. Like, what is that about? Who came up with the idea that like as you grow older as a woman, your hair is supposed to get shorter and shorter? Like, that's so weird.
Totally. And I do think you bring up a good point, Liesel. Like I do still stand by what I said of, just trying to feel a bit more my age sometimes. But that there is no restriction and that fashion is totally a form of self-expression that knows no limits. And I agree, especially also with the hair thing. Like you can do whatever you want, and people do get weird about the hair of like if her hair is too long, like, oh, she's trying to be too young, like you act your age. And I don't think
Yeah.
that's cool.
People absolutely get weird about that, and I agree entirely. There should be no restrictions or anything on that. And I think that what there should be, rather, which is something, Gigi, that you brought up that really resonated with me, is like as you get older, and something I've noticed about myself is more like, oh, what I feel good in. And I'm not going to say that when you're younger, you're dressing for anyone else, but I think that as I've gotten older, which inherently with getting older and getting more independent is more like self security and like self confidence, just like general comfort with myself as a human being, the more time that I have spent years in this body. And when I've been able to choose an outfit that I like for me rather than for anyone else or for a trend or for any of that, that feels like a big move of like, oh, I'm shopping at this place that maybe no one else shops at. And in seventh grade, that would have been a big deal because no one would know what I'm wearing. But now I like the way I look and I'm dressing for me. And whether that means my hair is down to my toes when I'm 90 years old, or if I'm wearing jean shorts when I'm 40, like whatever it is, I feel like when I'm able to dress for myself and no one else, which I'm, trying my best to get to, and I'm not saying I'm there 100% because I'm still, a wise baby, but that feels like adult, mature clothing, dressing, etc.
Yeah, totally. Like, I think I've heard from a lot of adults, especially like adult women in my life, that like the older you get, the less you give a fuck what other people think about you. But this is kind of interesting when you talk about it in the context of clothing, because I think that there are a lot of women who do feel really boxed in by clothing and feel like they have to dress a certain way, especially at work. Which I know is something that like the business casual aesthetic doesn't really vibe with any of us. But at the same time, like I do see people out there who manage to adhere to a business professional aesthetic and might have a job that is, pretty strict as far as what you can wear, but they manage to make it their own, and I think that like being able to embrace like restrictions that you might have, whether that's at school or, there's certain dress codes or whatever for work, like being able to have your creativity and still like have your self-expression within that can be really powerful as well.
I think that business casual makes me feel the same way that fine dining makes Lily feel. It makes me feel extremely uncomfortable, and I can't imagine ever feeling myself or dressing for myself under the restriction of business casual. But I think you bring up a good point, Liesel, that like there is more wiggle room than I think I'm thinking of. Like I'm literally thinking skirt pantsuit from Banana Republic. You know what I mean? I think that there is more wiggle room with it. And I think that getting to exercise your creativity within those restrictions is fun. And I do think that as our generation grows into like the working position, there is also just general, like more open-mindedness about what is, appropriate for work and what isn't. So there's already that kind of extra room.
Totally. And like growing up, I literally thought I was going to have to dress like Hillary Clinton every day, like literally pantsuits, skirt suits, all of that kind of stuff, like stilettos every day. And like you totally don't. And I'm really grateful that like I live in this time that, business casual and like business attire in general is becoming so much more flexible and fun. Like dresses and patterns and colors, like it's all so much more accepted. And like sweaters, like throwing on a sweater and like a pair of pants and like some loafers has become so accepted. And like I really am grateful for that because I know that it hasn't always been that way. And this is another instance where I'm so grateful to be a woman because I feel like there is a lot more wiggle room for women in the workplace. Whereas, like men who have very conventional jobs, having to wear a full on suit every single day, day after day, would be torture for me.
Especially because I think some guys feel very much themselves in a suit, and I think some guys totally don't. And so it would be really unfortunate to be like boxed into that if that does not feel like you.
But I also think that like, there's this whole like tech revolution as far as like business attire of like guys who just go to work wearing like a hoodie and like sweatpants and sneakers. And like I, I could understand how that might be nice for a certain period of time, but I also think that like getting dressed up, you like take on a slightly more mature persona and more confident persona when you're feeling like you're dressing for success a little bit. And I wonder what it's like to work in one of those tech environments where the dress code is so casual, because I feel like I could just fall into wearing like pajamas all the time.
Absolutely, I agree, and it also makes me think of I don't know if the trend, but like what I've heard a lot about how businesses do like casual Fridays or like how that's becoming more popular, and just the idea that like we can dress the way we want. I mean, you can always dress the way you want and like express yourself through clothing, but having a day that is designated to dress however you feel you want to with no restrictions is this, evolution towards maybe a little bit more casual or something like that that really resonates with me because I do not want to wear a pantsuit ever in my entire life. Ever, ever, ever.
I would just like to circle back around to what Liesel's saying with this tech fashion sense. And in my mind, part of it comes from the fact that they really don't give a fuck. They're like, I literally have billions of dollars. Fuck with me and my hoodie. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, I can do whatever I want because I'm so smart and so successful, and I'm going to do it all, in my basic ass hoodie. But I guess we'll now get into the final topic. Lily, will you share with us?
Yes. So, one way in which I do feel really adult is I am very comfortable talking on the phone. Obviously, not to I am comfortable talking to my friends and family on the phone, but in a more mature way, whether that be basic things like making restaurant reservations or like more advanced things like calling, let's say to make like a doctor's appointment or something. Like, those are things where I am comfortable doing on my own, and like sending emails, like whether it be to professors or to reserve something. I don't know exactly why you would need to be doing that on your email, but I am very comfortable doing things like that. And that is something that I feel like I have gotten better at in the recent past, and that I can identify in the way past being so uncomfortable with and not being able to see a world in which I could get there. So I feel very proud that that is a way in which I have grown up.
Well, first, I would just like to say Lily is so phone proficient in the sense of like talking to anyone on the phone, and this has always been kind of a part of our dynamic as friends that like, especially as a kid, I was so anxious to talk to people on the phone. And still to this day, I do find myself having to like rehearse a little bit or like, prepare myself to have a phone conversation in a more professional setting. But I will say, I can sense myself becoming more and more comfortable with it as well. Like, I think that there are situations where I've overcome that fear, I've overcome that anxiety, and I'm like, I can do this. I've done it before. I just got to tell them what I want. Like, I feel like making the realization that all I have to do is say what I want from them or what I'm like trying to get at. And I don't know why at a point in time I thought it was any more complicated than that. But making that realization that it is so simple has really helped me grow in this area.
And I think that emailing and talking on the phone, the another layer to this is just a general comfort with talking to adults or people of authority, which I know is something that is very intimidating, especially for younger people. And I have certainly felt that, but I have felt myself getting more and more comfortable. Even small things, like I remember being younger and being so uncomfortable with the idea of like talking to most of my friends' parents for an extended period of time, which now just seems so stupid. Like they are people, they have a child that is my age and my friend. Why does it matter if I have to make small talk with them about how their day was for literally a minute while my friend is in the bathroom and we're at dinner? But I remember when I was younger, that being like, what are we going to talk about? Or like, being in the car with someone's parent, if they dropped you off at home and your friend didn't come, like that is a specific instance I can remember happening once or twice and me being overcome with anxiety. And now being like, if I had to sit in the car with anyone's parent, like even if I didn't know them, like just general comfort with talking to people who are older than I am feels like a mature thing that I am proud to say I have honed or am working on honing.
Yeah, and I think that I have a lot to say. First off, I'll address this talking to parents situation. I think that like when you're a young kid, like there aren't really expectations. Like if I'm interacting with like an elementary student, kid, like I'm not expecting them to be like very formal or like know how to talk to me. Like I feel like as the adult in the situation, like it's my job to like make them feel comfortable. But I feel like once you start to get into middle school and high school, there is this expectation of like being able to hold conversation and like, address adults in an appropriate way. And I think that like it's not a situation where like the rules are very clear. And that's what always kind of tripped me up is like, I know that some people would like really refer to their friends' parents as Mr. and Mrs. That's something that like I'm not comfortable doing, but I'm also not comfortable being like, hey, Cindy. Obviously, I'm comfortable saying hey, Cindy, which is Lily's mom. Shout out. But like, with other parents who if I'm just meeting them for the first time, like I'm not just going to be like, hey, what's up, Cindy? But like I'm also not going to be like, hello, Mrs. Zoller, how are we doing today? So it's like, how do you even go about addressing adults? And I think that like, that's where a lot of young people get really tripped up is like this idea of manners and formality. But I think like as you get older, like what Lily is saying, like you just get more and more comfortable talking to adults and you just realize that they're people and that like I wouldn't want someone calling me Miss Staubitz. So like I'm not going to call anyone Mr. or Mrs. Like I just don't think that people nowadays, at least in our social circles, really enjoy that or need that.
So I would like to circle back around to emailing because I recently had a discussion take place in one of my Zoom classes specifically about emailing with professors and this sort of like discomfort around trying to come off as professional and respectful and just like reading it over 5 times before sending it to like make sure there's no mistakes and just like really definitely overthinking it coming from the position of like inferiority to that person of authority, you know what I mean? And a lot of us were talking about how like we feel most comfortable using exclamation points to just be like friendly and excited, and like that's how I think of exclamation points. That's how I use them with my friends. Like to me, that is how they function. And I understand the English language might have some other thoughts on that. And supposedly, like, the professor was like, I didn't realize that you guys thought that periods were super serious and mean sounding. And we're like, yeah, like low key periods just come off kind of like a little like curt. You know, it comes off a little like short and like sassy a little bit. And so it was just kind of this funny exchange. And luckily my professor was super chill about it. He was like, you know, I've talked to my professor friends and we sometimes talk about this stuff. And he was like, whenever I get emails that don't necessarily fit my typical idea of what an email should look like, I remind myself, like, you guys have your own norms, values, thoughts on how this exchange should go. So I try and just be open-minded about it. But he was like, some of your professors like don't like how, you know, you don't address them with a greeting and how you don't sign off. I'm like, are you kidding? Like, that's so, like, that would feel so scary and disrespectful. But he was like, you know what? Everyone kind of has their own way of going about it. It's just funny on the topic of trying to talk to adults with emailing in mind, being professional, trying to become comfortable with that.
Yeah, I always thought it was funny in college when I would spend all of this time emailing a professor, you know, hello, doctor, blah, 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 you know, like, how are you doing? Hope everything is well, blah, 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 blah. Sincerely, Liesel Staubitz, blah, blah, blah. And they would respond, okay, sent from my iPhone. Like, no greeting, no, you know, signature, nothing. Because, like, professors get emails constantly and like they're not that wrapped up in all of that, you know, formality. But also circling back to just phone calls in general, I would say that I was not very comfortable making phone calls for quite a while, especially just like professional phone calls, just not my expertise. My coworker Riley, shout out once again to Riley, knows that I did not enjoy making phone calls, and oftentimes I would ask her to make phone calls instead of me because I just didn't really enjoy it. But what I have found is, especially in answering the phone, it helps me a lot to, I now have a standard answer, which is, hello, this is Liesel. And I think that that helps a lot of the awkward beginning of a phone call. Like when I get a phone call from a random number that I don't know, that's how I answer it. And even if it is like a phone number that I've saved, but I've only spoken to them a couple times, it just helps introduce the phone call in a good way. And then that other person oftentimes is like, oh, hello, Liesel, this is blah, blah. And it just starts the flow of conversation a lot better than me just being like, hello, and like waiting for them to say hello. And then they might not know who they're speaking to. I might not know who they are. So I feel like it is just like getting into routines and habits. And I think that like this is an area of maturity and growing up that is very gradual. You know, for most people, they don't feel super comfortable making business calls or making phone calls that need to be professional or emails, but the more you do it, the more used to it you become.
Yeah, I would say having worked with Liesel the past couple of summers, I watched her answer the phone like, hello, you know, and that's a bit of an exaggeration. So I'm sorry for exposing you, Liesel. But like sometimes if you couldn't understand the person or like if the conversation was going in a weird direction, like you would get visibly up uncomfortable. And I could see that. Not necessarily that it translated on the phone, but like I could see it, you know, and as your sister, I could see it.
And to give myself the benefit of the doubt, oftentimes there was a language barrier in these phone calls, and oftentimes English was not the first language of the people I was speaking to. So I will cut myself a little bit of slack in that area.
Totally. But the point that I'm trying to make is that Liesel, although I saw her be that way a couple summers ago, I now see her flawlessly answer the phone. Hello, this is Liesel. Talk to different people, sort things out, whatever, with such comfort. And I think it, as you're saying, just is a gradual thing that the more that you do it, the more it's super comfortable. All right, so now let's get into our recommendations for this episode. Liesel, would you share with us your recommendation for today?
Yes, I actually have two recommendations for today because I just thought of another one. So obviously we record our podcasts a bit in advance, so I'm not exactly sure when this will be coming out. But a couple days ago, Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away very sadly. And it has just been a reminder of what a remarkable woman she was and all of the incredible things that she did. And I watched the documentary RBG about her, and I thought it was an incredible documentary. And so if you haven't seen it and you don't know much about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her life, I would highly, highly recommend watching that documentary. The other recommendation that I have is a type of art that I recently decided to try out, which is called pour art or pour acrylic painting. So basically, you get a canvas and you use the special type of paint that's very runny, and you take it and you put it in a cup and you fill the cup up with different colors, and then you pour it onto the canvas and you kind of swirl it around in different patterns. And then with gloves on, you take the canvas and kind of manipulate it and move it around to create lots of different colors. If you look this up on YouTube, there are some amazing videos of people doing flawless, incredible art with this technique, and it's very soothing and satisfying to watch as well. So I definitely recommend looking this up and possibly getting a little art kit of your own. I know I got mine off of Amazon for like $60, and it came with everything that you needed, like canvases and a ton of paints. So I think that it's really important to keep up our creativity even as we are getting older, and it's such a fun and easy thing to do. And like, no matter how bad at this type of art you are, it will turn out good. Like, they always come out cool.
Totally. Luckily enough, Carly, my roommate, happened to have like a similar kind of kit. So Liesel sent me photos of the pour art that her and our mother had done. And I was like, yo, Carly, look at what my sister did. She was like, oh, I have that kit. Or like, not the exact same one. It was like a Crayola version. But we did it that morning and had so much fun. And they totally do come out super cool each time, no matter what colors you do or what technique you do. Oh, thank you. For those of us who are watching on YouTube, you can view what Liesel's pour art looks like. Be sure to head over to the YouTube channel if you have not already. But my recommendation for today is a TV show on Hulu called Pen 15. This is a TV show that I watched the first season of a while ago at this point, and the second season has just come out. Basically, the premise of the show is these two females who write the show. They are acting as themselves in middle school amongst other middle school aged actors. So like they are 30-year-old women pretend like they have like they put fake braces on, they like have funky hair, and it's set in the 90s because that's when they went to middle school. And there's just so many funny situations that play out on this show, and especially just getting to watch them like walk the halls and act like they were in middle school amongst other actual kids is just hilarious. And I think it does again really get at the theme of this episode regarding growing up and reflecting on the past and learning from your experiences and being able to laugh at some of the ridiculous stuff that we grew up experiencing. So I would highly recommend you give that show a try if you have not already. And thank you for listening to Sophomore Citizens, the podcast by young people for young people, with new episodes every Monday. So we'll see you wise babies then. Also, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Sophomore Citizens. And make sure to leave a 5-star review.